Life has a way of changing over time. One day you're a student going to school every day as a kid, eating lunch with people in the cafeteria or whatever people in school do. I don't know, I was homeschooled. And then 20 years later, you're out of college. Or maybe you're a franchise that 60 years ago was loved by millions and millions of people, inspiring a generation to wonder about the possibility of what lies in the future, and what humanity will be capable of when we put our differences aside and look ahead into the stars. And any semblance of what you thought you understood about the franchise has completely changed to something you don't recognize. See, Star Trek is an interesting case into doing exactly what the fanbase does not want and refusing to learn your lesson. Because the last 10 years have been a constant stretch of ups and downs with no real consistency on whether or not a project turns out good or not. Maybe you'll have one season of a show that turns out great, and then the next season will completely flip itself upside down and lose the fans that it made in the first season. Maybe you'll try and bring back a classic character for a new show, and nobody will like it at the start, and then over the course of it, it gains a lot of fans back. But in that last decade of television, you realize that there hasn't been any films. Because Star Trek, after the original series, has had a lot of movies in the theater that have since become really iconic, such as Wrath of Khan or Voyage Home. Because it's been almost 10 years since Star Trek Beyond released in theaters, and that movie was divisive enough that my dad has since refused to never return to the theaters ever again. And so, almost 9 years later, they decided to try their hand at yet another movie, that being Section 31. A highly anticipated movie about Emperor Philippa Georgiou from the Mirror Universe, who traveled to the main universe in Star Trek Discovery, and then since traveled back to the main timeline at the end of Season 3. The story kicks off with a flashback of her becoming Emperor, with her final task being to murder her entire family by poisoning them. And then she takes on her friend/love interest as a servant by burning half of his face, and keep that in mind because that will become very important later. Then flash forward to the present, that being the mid-23rd century, and she's working at a bar until the Federation comes over and knocks on her door and is like, hey, we need you to come on this business and help us with this big super secret mission that we're doing. And her being the super evil emperor of the Terran Empire from the Mirror Universe that kills pretty much anybody that disagrees and opposes in any way, puts her foot down and tells this guy, alright, I'll do it. And then she joins this merry band of misfits called Section 31. And for those who don't know who Section 31 are, I'll break it down for you. The Federation of Planets are a series of planets with varying species that all agreed to work together and explore space and have treaties and stuff. Starfleet is part of this Federation of Planets, and that's where the Enterprise and Kirk and Picard and all these other captains come from. And getting into Starfleet isn't the easiest thing in the world. In fact, you need to be the best of the best of the best that the galaxy has to offer. You need to be at the top of your game with everything to be on a starship, especially when there's only like 12 in existence at this time period. Now take a look at Section 31. That is Federation Black Ops. And we haven't really seen Section 31 much in the timeline, but the few times that we've seen them, they've always been like super strict. They're like the Mission Impossible crew of Star Trek. They're the IMF. So let's take a look at the movie and see who is in Section 31. So you got the super strict guy with a backstory of being from the 20th century and being taken to the present and having to work for Section 31. Interesting. Okay. He seems like he might be qualified. Then you have this weird Iron Man wannabe who's like half cybernetic and half person, and is constantly unserious and makes a point out of not understanding the basic definition of things. And throughout the entire movie, he's just kind of annoying, and I really hate him. And then you got a Vulcan who's not actually a Vulcan. He's actually a tiny alien controlling a cyborg that's the body of a Vulcan. That means that he doesn't have to abide by the logic standards of a Vulcan and can show emotions and stuff, because he's not actually a Vulcan, guys. Oh, by the way, did I mention that he's not a Vulcan? And then you have Lieutenant Rachel Garrett, who's famous for appearing in a Next Generation episode nearly 30 years ago, who aspires to become a captain, which, By the way, she does, in that one episode that released 30 years ago. She's partaking in Section 31 for this one mission only, and while she's here, she doesn't do anything remotely remarkable. She doesn't exactly come across as the best of the best that the galaxy has to offer, but at least she's more interesting than the Vulcan guy who's actually an alien controlling a Vulcan. Did I mention that he's not actually a Vulcan? So this Guardians of the Galaxy ripoff has to capture this guy and interrogate him about some mysterious object that they're looking for. This thing is called the Godsend, or the God's End. This group of top-tier geniuses couldn't figure it out, and Giorgio had it created so that she could destroy multiple planets with a single activation. And then, being the ruthless dictator that she is, she ordered that it be destroyed so that it could never be used. But before she can determine how exactly it still exists, a masked figure fights her and takes it. Now, call me crazy, but after getting a flashback of the main character at the beginning of the movie torturing a man that she once loved, that guy being the only other named character in the movie, and now suddenly seeing an object from the Mirror Universe in the main timeline. But I really think that a 5th grader with no knowledge of the franchise could put that together in seconds. But then the movie tries to pull a fast one and show a flashback of him killing himself with poison. And I'll be honest, when I saw this I thought, well, I guess it isn't him. Unless it still is. And you know what? It still was. And his goal is to use the Godsend to get revenge on Giorgio by destroying a bunch of planets in the Prime timeline. Meanwhile, the Kirkland brand Suicide Squad is trapped on a planet with no way to get off, and they suspect that one of the people among the Section 31 crew is a spy. And so they spend the next 20 to 30 minutes doing literally nothing and not trusting each other, and eventually finding out that the tiny alien controlling a Vulcan, who by the way isn't a Vulcan and is actually just a robot that looks like one, took control of Great Value Iron Man so that he would kill himself and then try and place the murder on Rachel Garrett.
Sometimes my genius it's almost frightening.
And Giorgio, being the only person from this impossible mission force from Wish, is the only person who was able to figure it out. And yes, while that makes sense, it really makes you think, what is the point of all of these other crew members being here other than to be a nuisance? None of them are smart, none of them are competent, they don't have any reason to be in Section 31. In Star Trek 50 years ago, I don't even think they would have gotten on a starship, much less Federation Black Ops. And so they chase the fake Vulcan guy off of the planet and make their final stand against the crying, tortured guy, who I forgot to mention is crying in just about every scene that he's in throughout the entire movie. So they board his ship, stop him, and the Godsend destroys the rift back to the Mirror Universe. Then Giorgio goes back to her bar and some of the crew members come and meet up with her, where she's told that she might be involved in more missions in the future which we're never going to see, and the movie ends. And to be honest, my highest point of praise for this movie was that it was an hour and a half and not 2.5 hours. I really don't understand how something like this could get made. It's been over 9 years since the last movie has hit theaters, and the first thing that they do is this. Which, as you can tell by all of the reviews, people are loving it. This might be the beginning of a new golden age for Star Trek, where we start seeing more movies and stuff in the future, all of which are passionately received by the fan base. And who knows, maybe we'll see this crew come back in one of them. Jokes aside, this isn't a good sign at all. And going into it, I knew it wasn't a good sign because I already started seeing a bunch of YouTube video titles of people saying the movie wasn't good, and the fact that it was straight to streaming and didn't even have a theater release had me worried. My theory is that during production this was intended to be the pilot of a Section 31 show, and then Paramount decided, no. It's not gonna work, it's gonna be horrible, but you can at least finish this production since you're so far in, and we'll release it as a Paramount movie. A lot would have had to change as far as contracts go for this to be true, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me. Why make a movie about Section 31 when you could make a movie about the Eugenics War, or World War III, or something else in the Star Trek universe? One of the things that makes Section 31 cool is that we don't see them often. They usually have a certain type of presence that this crew just does not have. And I think going forward, we're gonna have to wait another 10 to 20 years before they try to make another Star Trek movie, which I'll be honest, really sucks. Because I love the shows, but I prefer to watch movies. I prefer when I can watch one story in a 2 to 2.5 hour segment instead of watching an entire season of television, and it's rare for Star Trek to pull off a full season narrative that's worth watching. They have their Adventure of the Week shows like Strange New Worlds, but Discovery and Picard are always hit or miss with their seasons. And I'm a Star Trek fan, so I'll always root for the franchise. I just hope that Paramount and the rest of the Star Trek team take the correct lesson from Section 31 and focus on making a really good movie next time around instead of halting them for the next 10 to 20 years. But anyways, I've said pretty much everything that I gotta say here, so later.